if you're wondering why this title, why a Europe of diasporas, yes? This is a European project that is implemented by the Armenian General Benevolent Union Europe, who is represented here by Mr. Nicolas Tavitian, with whom, as I said earlier, pulls together this whole academic event. It's actually the 6th meeting, yes, if I'm not wrong, within this network and this project that started to take place 1 year ago. Mr. Tavitian is going to present this project, what happened in between 2015 and 2016, and which is the philosophy behind this network. Nicolas, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you I can't speak without a slideshow. So yes, thank you very much for the very kind introduction. I'll take permission to correct you right away. The project wasn't implemented only by AGBU, it was implemented in partnership by AGBU Europe, so an Armenian organization, the EUJS, European Union of Jewish Students, a Jewish organization, Pirena Mensa, a Roma organization, so Gypsy, you would say. So those are the 3 main partners in the project, and there were a great many people involved. It is indeed today the did you say sixth seminar in the project. There was even one before in Georgia that actually brought about the whole idea of the project. Yes. So I'll start off by thanking you very much, Oana, and also Andrea, who must be too shy to sit up here, but who did an amazing work in preparing the conference. And contrary to what you're saying, I hardly helped at all, but I'm very happy to be up there. You work tirelessly, I know, and this is a very important event to us to bring these important ideas forward. And my plan now is to say a few things about the project, so you know what we've been doing, what this was all about. To focus in on why the representation or the image of diasporas matters, the image in the public space. And then I'll go straight to a few ideas about what we can do about it, or indeed what we have been doing. A couple of words about myself, for instance, in AGBU. AGBU is a large Armenian organization of the diaspora. It was founded in Cairo in 1906, so that's 110 years ago this year. And then it moved around the world and it evolved with the diaspora. And its headquarters are today in New York, and in 100 years, who knows? The diaspora is a shifting adventure, a moving adventure. It evolves with history, but it's always kept certainly one focus on the Republic, on Armenia, and today on the Republic of Armenia, where it invests a lot. So a few words about the project, the Europe of Diasporas. I mentioned these are the communities that have been involved, so you might recognize the symbols. The symbol on the left is for the Roma. The second one is the Armenians. The third one, that one is well known, is the Jews. And the fourth one is the Assyrians. These are the logos of the organizations I mentioned earlier. We held a series of seminars. This is a picture from the first seminar, where we brought together people from all these communities to discuss what is a diaspora, what are the issues we want to deal with together. This is a quick list of some of the events that had taken place. We've since forgot on the list there, seminar that took place in Warsaw in September, and of course today's conference as well. We held a major conference in the European Parliament where Andrea, one of the organizers of this conference, was awarded a prize for the best photo that resulted from a photo competition we organized. You'll see the photo a little bit later on, and if we go and see the exhibition, you will see her photo in the exhibition as well. A very striking photo, and you'll understand why that photo got her the first prize. So what have we been discussing? What diasporas have in common. So what is it that makes a diaspora a diaspora? It may sound like a trivial question, but you'll find that there is a lot to talk about, and many people question, what are we people doing together? What do the Romas, the Jews, and the Armenians, or the Assyrians have to do with one another? What are the issues that preoccupy our different communities? And we'll find sometimes they're similar issues. Sometimes it's very different. Just to take two examples, the remembrance of genocides is obviously something that's very central to the political agenda of these different communities. On the other hand, their social agendas, you might say, or educational agendas, can be very different. The problems affecting Roma communities, especially in a country like Romania or its neighbor Bulgaria, are very different from the problems affecting the Jewish or Armenian communities in these same countries. And finally, it wasn't just about talking and exploring our issues, it's also about what shall we do to get the assumption of the project that there is something to be done together. I put in this paragraph here because I think it's our consensus definition of what a diaspora is, and I think it's important we can use the word diasporas in many ways, but it's important to be clear on the way it was used in the context of this project. The quote says, we are diasporas of Europe, we are dispersed over many countries, yet we share a common, durable identity across borders. The idea of dispersion is there, of course, and the idea of durability. A diaspora does not exist just for one generation. It's something that certainly evolves, but remains. It's something that has a historical dimension as well. So that would be our definition. And you'll notice here, we don't talk about home country or homeland. It doesn't need to be intrinsic to the definition of diaspora, which doesn't mean that it's not important for some of them. But you'll find that for the Roma, for instance, homeland, for most of their existence, did not matter. They do notionally have, the Roma come from somewhere. It's now agreed that they come from India historically, somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 years ago. But that story was not carried with them by the people who arrived in Europe. That's something that linguists and now geneticists have later discovered, but it's not something that was at the center of the Roma consciousness. What did we discuss together in the project? Very briefly, as you might imagine, questions of heritage. If you're involved in one of these communities, I think you'll recognize these keywords and what they mean. Questions of heritage, relations with a state or not. So in the case of the Armenian diaspora, how we relate to Armenia is a constant subject of discussion, and you can imagine for the Jewish diaspora as well. Questions relating to education, remembrance, I already mentioned, of course, prejudice, and the negotiating identities. In other words, how do you deal with multiple identities, with mixed marriages, with moving from one country of residence to another, and so on, migration. Okay, so that's just a little bit on what the project has done, and there's a little bit more coming on that in the course of the presentation. But I'd like to home in on why representation matters. I mean, after all, we could imagine diasporas just need to live their lives, build up their institutions, and not preoccupy themselves too much with the way they're perceived by people around them. I'd argue there are three main reasons why representations matter. The first is diaspora, you saw in the definition, are by definition dispersed. We don't live alone. We don't live necessarily in concentrated areas of population. So what our neighbours think matters. What our, the teachers of our children think matters. What our colleagues at work think about, the Jews, the Armenians, the Roma. It matters and it affects our lives in very deep way. Something that is less often discussed but equally important is what do policy makers think about your community. That too, although they will never admit to it, it affects very deeply how they decide on budget. Is there going to be a budget to finance your youth movement or not? Are they going to make a public space available? Are they going to allow a demonstration or not? There are so many daily decisions by public authorities that is affected by their opinion of your community and of its legitimacy in the public space. And finally, self-representation, what people around us in the diaspora, what they think, that determines also what we think about ourselves. If for generations you hear that your community, you hear bad things about your community, you will end up internalizing those thoughts. So it's impossible to have entirely, it's very difficult, shall we say, to have entirely different representations of a community in the in-group and the out-group, within the community and in wider society. So, in speaking a little bit more practically, we've been discussing in the project what can go wrong, how are diasporas misrepresented. And again, this is very cursory, and I look forward to deeper discussions and more specific discussions in the rest of the conference on these subjects. Some are obvious in this list, and some are less obvious. So what can go wrong? Well, sometimes a community might be represented as a burden on society, they're assumed to have generally antisocial behavior. Now, I hesitate to give examples, but we all know about anti-Semitism, we all know about anti-Gypsyism, and in some countries attitudes also to Armenians. So these traditional negative prejudices. Secondly, sometimes diasporas are represented as a threat, a fifth column. I mean, clearly those messages, particularly targeted at the Jews and the Armenians, they preceded the genocide. So they're represented as an outside threat, as an organized, these are inspired by conspiracy theories, and these are ideas which are still circulating today. Another very widespread and also problematic representation of diasporas are the victim diasporas. So diasporas which are known and represented only for their suffering, and typically for the genocides they have suffered. Certainly the Jews with the Holocaust, I think that would often be the case. And many Jewish scholars now recognize that is a problem because it has established the existence of Jewish communities in the eyes of many Europeans as being legitimated only by their suffering, or mainly by their suffering. And in that process, the very existence, the very history of Jews in Europe has disappeared. So the history of the Jews is the history of the Holocaust. That also will reduce a whole community to just one event and one image. The fourth one here is the invisible diaspora, to the extent that, and that can happen. That has happened often to the Armenians in many countries, but also to the Roma and in some cases to the Jews. Definitely to the Assyrians is that the diaspora, to the extent that it is not a recognized category, socio-political category. Unlike a state, unlike a national minority, unlike an immigrant group, for instance, can fail to have any representation at all, and that, I argue, is also a problem. And that is the agenda we want to set. I didn't put a slide. AGBU recently has started a new drive. We developed a new strategy, and our ultimate goal is that Armenian identity in the diaspora, as in Armenia, should be desirable. It should be something attractive to Armenians, and it should be attractive to others. And some Armenians in America within the organization have launched a hashtag which has become very popular. It's very small there, but it's Global Armenians. It was a new way of envisaging the Armenians. It's saying we're a global nation. It doesn't matter if we're in Armenia or around the world. We're one nation, and we're at home in the world. That's the image we want to project. I wouldn't say that's a whole communication plan, but it's a very inspiring start. It's a start. It's a start that's also premised on the idea that although the genocide is part of our history, and it still has consequences today, we refuse to be defined by that event. Which brings me to point number 2: avoid playing the game of others. I talked a little bit earlier about how the Jews in Europe have been over-defined by the story of the Holocaust. That is very much the discussion on victimization and genocide has very much been a dialogue between society around the diasporas and the diasporas themselves, and in which the diasporas have sought to affirm their existence through this victimization. We now need to go beyond that. If we want to achieve empowerment, the narrative of victimization will not be enough. Anyway, the point of this particular slide is we should, each of our communities, each of our diasporas separately and all together, we must now take charge of our communication and project the image we want to project to the world. And of course it has to be coherent with who we actually want to be. The second thing is we should educate ourselves, we should educate Europe, our fellow Europeans, about what diasporas are. And very modestly, the project has started on this question. I mentioned earlier on the competition, for instance, photos on diasporas. We launched a competition throughout Europe and got many excellent entries. And the exhibition emerged from this competition. It gave 20 very subjective but very rich representations of what the diaspora communities are and can be. And so this is the excellent the winner of the competition, but you'll see a much better, higher quality version of it in real life in the exhibition. So this was one of our contributions. Second thing we've been trying to do, and that I'll connect to something that the ambassador mentioned earlier on. If you look at the ordinary map of Europe, well, there are millions of Roma, Armenians, Jews in there, and they're nowhere on that map. And if we had time, I could have shown you a map of the regional minority of the minorities in Europe. They don't show the diasporas either, because they're dispersed, because they don't have a territory in Europe. So we started building our own map. So it's on the website. I invite you to go to the website. I could connect now, but maybe it would take up too much time. On this map, of course, we don't have a territory, but we have an awful lot of landmarks. There are places, there are events, there are people that have marked the history of all these communities. And we started placing them on the map, and I can tell you there's an awful lot. And we're learning an enormous amount about our communities at the other end of the continent. And these are usually people, these are usually events and landmarks that say, there'll be Roma history in Poland that the Roma in Spain have no idea about. So this is an excellent tool for educating ourselves, but also for educating others in Europe as to the depth and the richness of the contribution to Europe of each of our communities. What's going on with the slide? Oh. It looks like you're going to see the website after all, right? So this is the map. Oh, that's true. Okay, never mind. Okay, it's on the computer. All right. We came up also with a charter. So this is a text that we wrote as short as possible with the key issues. The sentence with the definition of diasporas I gave you earlier on, that's extracted from the beginning of this text. And we highlight there some of the key issues. After a lot of discussion, we came to some understanding that there were some things that we definitely had in common and that we definitely wanted to work on in common. And from memory, I mean, there's remembrance, there's heritage, there's education back over and over and over again. And of course, questions of representation are very important. About diasporas, we also have some substantive messages to put forward. Not just that we exist and we've contributed to Europe, but it's very important to project a positive message based on the reality of our experience. The diasporas are not a threat. That in fact they've contributed to building bridges across the continent ever since we've arrived here. I mean, how many wars have been started by the Armenians or the Roma or the Jews in Europe? None. And which state can claim as much? So the diasporas are a factor of peace and communications within the continent. They're one of the fibers that keeps the texture of the continent stronger, that makes it stronger. Also, diasporas have developed out of necessity cooperative, human-centered survival strategies, precisely because they didn't have access to state resources, and of course to state violence. So if you cannot use force, you have to use other strategies. So they developed skills in these fields. And finally, because diasporas move from one country to another, they favor good government. When the Jews were persecuted in Spain, they moved to the Ottoman Empire. And their skills, their capital, came to reinforce the Ottoman Empire. And in those days, that was a long time ago, the Ottoman Empire was relatively better run than the Spanish kingdom, or more tolerant at least. So for these reasons, now these could be made into slogans. They're also subject for research. When the ambassador said too little research has been carried out on the diasporas, what they have in common, on their dynamics, on their sociology, I definitely concur. And if one of the agenda items we could put forward was that, I think that would be extremely useful. And with this, I'll end this presentation. I hope I haven't been too long.
Benny's here.
Okay, and we have Benny online, who is the president of the EU journalists. No, you stay in charge.
We should switch seats because.
And I connect with him.
Yeah, exactly.
So thanks very much.